And folks, and thanks so much for joining. Welcome to the Beacon. We've got our audience filtering in from our virtual waiting room. And so as you all are getting in and taking a look at the screen in front of you, let me just say a couple words of welcome. First off, thanks for tuning in this morning. This is Dominion Payroll's ongoing webinar, where we're trying to bring you insights and perspectives from around the business community to help you navigate all the challenges that have been presented in the last year, but then the challenges that present us in our daily operations. From legislative updates and analysis to industry spotlights and sharing the stories of folks' entrepreneurial journeys that you might not hear otherwise, this is the Beacon, and we are here for you every Wednesday at 11 a.m. I am incredibly excited to dive into the topic of the day, company culture in this hybrid era. But before I introduce our panel, just a couple housekeeping measures. If you do have any questions for our guests today, please drop those in the Q&A section that you see at the bottom of your screen. Try to avoid the chat. We do record these for posterity's sake, and the Q&A plays nicely with that recording while the chat disappears into the ether at the end of the hour. I will do my best to work questions into to our guests as we go. I do encourage everybody to go to dominionpayroll.com and hit the resources tab at the top of the page where you can see our upcoming schedule of webinars. You can register there. You can also see all of our past recordings, everything on the CARES Act, FFCRA, and all the fun legislation that we've gotten to know and love over the last 11 months. And then should any questions pop into your head in the early morning hours before the sun has risen, you can always reach out to questions@dominionpayroll.com and we will take care of you there. All right, so now on to today's topic, one that I am really excited to explore, and I couldn't be graced with a better panel to dive into this topic. So today we're going to be looking at company culture in a changing time. Let's look at how we measure culture. How do we make an impact on our organizations? What is the responsibility of our organizations to our workforce? And really, how do we move from this stage of crisis and containment and reaction into the next normal? How do we find meaning in the work that we do every day? To help me explore these topics, I am joined by two just fantastic experts. I am really excited to welcome Lisa Sordilla. Lisa is the Vice President of Human Resources at Energage, B Corp located in Philadelphia. Lisa has a long history in the world of sort of HR and HR management that goes back to, first and foremost, getting a degree in sociology. I have to give you a shout out there. You and I share similar bona fides. And time in sociology and social work before getting involved in the HR management of small and mid-sized businesses and landing at Energage in 2017. I love the mission of Energage to help make the world a better place to work together. And I'm excited to learn about your contributions to that and sort of your outlook on the state of work today. Thanks for being here, Lisa.
Thanks for having me.
Next up, it's my pleasure to introduce Matt Johnson. Matt is the Director of Change Management at Markel Corporation. To think that you could sum up an individual in a job title, Matt breaks that mold as a author of 2 books, Corporate Change Agent, a Pentagon policymaker. I believe you've authored some math textbooks and fronted a punk rock band. I am a fan of resumes. I have to say, and it is great to scroll through something that, never takes a straight path, but is clearly not one without purpose. And it is exciting to talk to you, Matt. I think both from your place, your position at Markel, looking at a multinational company and how it's going to manage the people element of its entire staff, its global workforce, to the work that you've done around, as an author, writing about the meaning that we find from work and the struggle that we, from which we derive it from. It's a joy to have you on here, Matt, and I really do appreciate you taking the time.
Well, it's great to be here, Kevin. Thank you.
Absolutely. So guys, I have done my best work here to sort of summarize your bios, but I think that I will never do quite as good an introduction as you're able to do yourself. Lisa, I'd like to turn to you. If you could tell us a little bit more about Energage, what it does, as a company, what's the focus and mission there, and your route into Energage, how you landed there.
Yeah, sure. So, as you mentioned earlier, our purpose is making the world a better place to work together. And how we do that is we help companies have a tool that they can use to understand their culture better. So, doing an employee engagement survey serves as that sort of diagnostic tool that they can then take and find their strengths and their focus areas and have something to work with. So I was a customer before I joined Energage, and I remember interviewing and seeing the purpose on the wall. I said, that is my purpose too. Like, I've always wanted to make every place I worked better. And so it was an easy connection for me, easy transition.
That kind of alignment is a special thing, and I
Mhm.
think something that we'll dive into a little bit more as we have this conversation. Before we jump into that, Matt, I tried to give the Indiana Jones sort of wandering map of your career, but tell us how did you end up at Markel, and what's it like, both as in that professional role and as a published author?
Yeah, no, thank you, Kevin. It's a story that starts on the banks of the Mississippi between Iowa and Illinois. So it's about a 45-minute story, which should be about perfect for time, right?
That's the length we've got.
Okay, wonderful. No, yeah, as you said, I won't sort of bore your audience with my journey. It's been a winding road, which I've found tremendously valuable, because I think the diversity of experiences really helped me to really look at things from a different perspective than a lot of folks that I've worked with. And I think it's that variety of perspectives that you can bring into a workplace that are really the most powerful, particularly in corporate environments. So yeah, I did spend time originally in mathematics, writing editing math books, and then went and played in a punk rock band, started reading nonfiction books, which then got me on a journey to get interested in national security, went back to school, went to work in the Obama administration, the Office of Secretary of Defense, and then met and fell in love with a lady from Richmond, Virginia, and moved down to do consulting at a boutique firm in change management. And that's what brought me to Markel. I love change management. I love the science of human behavior, and it's really been a tremendous opportunity to explore that.
Love it. That's great, and I love that, the winding journey. But I think that you're completely right, that oftentimes these sort of squishy topics, the ones around culture, around the softer things, it's not necessarily a metric of, what's our call volume or what's our response time. It's these things that we can all define in unique ways, and it's the folks that have had a breadth of experience that can really bring to bear. How do we deal with a diverse workforce? How do we have a policy that maybe is uniform writ large, but have it be applicable to a workforce that's in completely different environments and has different lived experiences? So I'm excited to dive into this. I want to start with what, on its face, may be a simple question, but I think it's something that articles and books have been written about. And really, how do we define company culture? I want to toss that out there because it's a bit of a buzzword, and I don't know that we always have a real clear line on exactly what that is. So, Lisa, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I would say your company culture is really how your employees define your organization and what their employee experience is like at your organization. And a company culture is either something that you intentionally drive to create the culture that you want, or it just organically happens in either a good or a bad way.
Right. So, I mean, whether it's good, bad, whether you pay attention to it or not, you have one.
Yes, exactly.
Matt, when you think about that, and I always sort of have an anthropological sort of view when I think about culture, and it's one thing to think of, perhaps a tribe in Papua New Guinea, and we can academically talk about culture, and it feels so different when we're talking about IBM, but I think that a lot of the principles can be pretty similar. What's your take on that? And when you're thinking about company culture, where do you operate from?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm right in line with you and Lisa on this one, which is I don't demarcate between the sort of anthropological work that has gone on through hundreds of years of research in terms of understanding human behavior in indigenous or tribal societies. It's the same exact dynamics that are at play in business and corporate environments today. And so when I look at culture, that's exactly it. And I think, Lisa, you really encapsulated it well. And if somebody's trying to figure out how do we define our culture, well, hopefully it's something that's so palpable that your people could repeat it back. But if you can't, there's a great exercise that Adam Grant, an organizational psychologist, put out there, where basically he said, if you want to understand what your company culture is, ask a representative sample of your employees to tell you a story about one thing that happens here that wouldn't happen somewhere else. And those stories will give you the defining characteristics of your culture.
I love that. That's actually a really fun exercise that frankly, I think I will take that back with me today. And I hope folks in our audience will apply that and think about ways to, what a fun thought experiment or organizational experiment rather.
Mm-hmm.
So as we're thinking about culture, so it's a facet of the organizations that we work for. And I think that we would all like to have and certainly aspire to create a good culture. That's obviously a subjective term. And I'm not going to ask either of you to say, well, these are the 3 things that must be in place by Friday of this week or you have a bad culture. But what are some elements that we're seeing? And I'm thinking broadly sort of about workplace trends, growing millennial presence in the workforce, some of the desires of employees. And who do they want to work for? What does a good culture look like these days? Who wants to jump on that one first?
I will. So, and through our research over the years of working with lots of different organizations, we have defined 15 things that we think drive culture. And I would say the ones that have the greatest impact are around communication. And we've certainly seen that in the last year, how we as leaders have had to adapt our communication and change, whether it was the format that we delivered it or the frequency of it, because we're missing out on that one-on-one interaction. But we call it communication up. So senior leaders really understand what's happening, and then communication down. You want your employees to find out things that are happening at your company from you and not from a news outlet or people outside your company. So I would say that communication is one super important aspect.
I would absolutely echo that. I think that the challenging first few months of the COVID pandemic, every person that I talked to at all levels of organizations just said, communicate early, often, hit people with it, meet them where they are, is just a critical strategic point in terms of maintaining that open culture and making sure that people don't feel isolated in an already isolating world. Matt, as you think about some of these trends in the workplace, and sort of leaning on your consulting background a little bit, when you step into a work environment and you sort of look around and you say, what are some of the things you're looking for in terms of, oh man, that looks healthy, or oh my gosh, that might indicate something toxic's going on here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Lisa, your list of 15 characteristics is exactly where to start. And if I zoom out in the aperture to kind of say, like, the first thing I'm looking for in a company culture, it wouldn't necessarily be about the who, which is where you think we would start. It's about the why. Because I think and it comes back to, probably somebody who's oversighted, but Simon Sinek in his book, Start With Why, and then find your why. I think that research is foundational because it can shape that why of why you do the work you do will actually shape who you attract and who you become. And I think if you look at an example, of course, I have to put in a plug for Markel. Markel's been around for 90 years. It's a company that has a well-defined culture, and we actually have a cultural creed that we call the Markel style. And if you look at it, you read it, it was written in 1986, but it really was meant to sort of codify, at that point, 50, 60 years of history. And when you look at it, the first letters are, we have a commitment to success. Okay, so you would say, yeah, you're a Fortune 500 company, and of course you have a commitment to success. What does that mean? But when you really think about this company, what I think has been most interesting at Markel is this is a company that's really, predominantly involved in insurance. And so when you think about insurance, okay, cool, we have people who understand the nature of risks that you might face. And you would think that a company that focuses on risk would see the future for its risks. But what I found about this culture is that we have a fundamental belief that people and our customers and shareholders and our employees should not see the future for their risk, but for their opportunities. And it's like somebody once told me, a quote from William Faulkner, which you wouldn't expect to hear in the walls of corporate America. And they said, in order to set sail to new horizons, you have to have the courage to look away from the shore. And so we've reframed the sort of why behind the work we do, which is basically to say, your greatest ambitions as a business or a person should not fade in the wake of all the things that could go wrong. And that why has actually been a big part of the who for over 90 years. And so that's the first thing I look for is, why do you actually do this work? And if you can't articulate it, then let's not talk about your culture yet, because we need to start with the foundational element.
And I think that's a really good point, and a great place to sort of distinguish between something that ends up in the back of an employee manual and says, hey, these are our 5 foundational principles that we haven't looked at or dusted off in 12 years versus lived values. Mm-hmm. And I think in a perfect world, the thing that you've expressly written down lines up 89% with your actions every day. But oftentimes there's a divergence there. Lisa, as you've looked out across, many organizations, Energage, talks with companies across the entire country. Yep. How often do you see that kind of alignment, or is that a frequent problem where everybody says, hey, I'm trying to think of an aspirational value. We value integrity above all else, and then you end up with a Wells Fargo situation. And yeah. You're like, oh gosh, well, you painted it on the wall, but you didn't live it.
Yeah.
And how problematic is that for the modern workforce?
First of all, we do work with a lot of top workplaces, and those tend to be companies that are on some journey of like recognizing the importance of how values and alignment really help provide also direction to people. So we do see that a lot. We know that companies that have strong values have higher innovation. They have less workplace injuries, for example, because when an employee has to make a decision, if it's very clear to them what the company values, then they're going to make the right decision. And so it is really important in driving the type of behaviors, but that really translates into business outcomes that we're all looking for.
Absolutely. Matt, I want to sort of turn to the topic du jour. I feel like we can't have conversations these days without bringing up a global pandemic, a time of transition and challenge. First off, how has Markel dealt with the fact that remote work happened overnight? I'm not sure exactly to the extent that was part of Markel's work culture already back in February and March of last year. But then the health and the practical concerns of navigating all this, but while also maintaining a vibrant workforce and employee engagement. How have you and Markel sort of risen to meet those challenges?
Yeah. So I think on a very practical level, we were the benefits of some technology investments that actually just allowed us to work from home overnight without any issues or interruptions. So that was nice, but you're probably not here to talk about IT or the sort of platforms we use. But I will say and again, it comes back to a cultural perspective. When you have an organization of people whose entire job is to understand and manage risk, they can become pretty resilient over time. And so if you look at Markel, it started in the Great Depression, it went through World War, it went through the recession in the 70s, went through all these different issues and economic collapses or near collapses. And so you have a culture that's kind of wired for bad things to happen. And so I think the combination of the technology enablement and then also just a resilient culture, a truly resilient culture, was really what pulled us through. And so yeah, we've on the, when you look at the Fortune 500, we've gone through the same journey that many companies have, which is how do you manage a hybrid in a hybrid environment? How do you maintain those social bonds and connections when you're not in the room? And so I think part of what we've been doing is to try and also learn, okay, in response to this, how do we do what we've done so well remotely? And that again comes back to the reason that Lisa's in the job she is, and she's a sociologist, is because I actually think that those are the people, the anthropologists, the social psychologists, sociologists, who are going to be best positioned to say, how do we preserve the types of human relationships and interactions we need when we can't actually be in the same room? And those people have been pivotal in the journey over the last year.
Lisa, sort of the same question to you, but sort of leaning on your vantage point, looking out across a lot of different companies. A company like Dominion Payroll, we did have the IT in place that I remember it was Friday the 13th, March of last year. My laptop came home with me, and it was barely a hiccup. The difficulties have emerged over time, but they weren't immediately present. The shortcomings, a few months in, you're like, gosh, I really miss seeing, Ryan around the water cooler or what have you. Other industries are not quite so lucky, so when you look across at manufacturing, certainly service and retail, from Energage's standpoint, as you look across all these different industries, honestly, the sort of the pulse check question that I want to ask you is how are they doing? Like in very simple, concerned terms.
Yeah.
What is the state in terms of rising to the challenge a year into this mess?
Yeah, I would say it was interesting at the beginning last year. People were a little bit hesitant to survey their employees because they thought, certainly it's going to be just doom and gloom. And what they actually found was the opposite, that just by asking how they were doing, and whether it's through their engagement survey or a pulse survey to find out, more detail about what's their status as a caregiver and what support did they need, or, are they finding that they're able to collaborate with their colleagues? Just the process of asking really opened up important conversations, and really people felt like they had a voice, they were seen and heard at a time when they needed to be seen and heard. So companies that invested their time in asking for feedback and then really taking that to heart and sharing that back with their employees are the ones that have done the best over the last year.
Excellent. I want to add just a thought that I had on specifically this topic, and it's something that I've seen work well, and I've sort of advised some of our clients around. It's easy to get caught up in the, oh gosh, we don't pass each other in the hall, and so how are we not having those spontaneous conversations? And not to take away any value from those, but I think it goes back to this idea of distilling what we hope to get from those. And the same thing around every aspect of company culture is that, if you've done the analysis and you say our company culture is passing each other in the hall, you've missed something. And so look at those really foundational elements of what you want your people to experience, and figure out what are the hybrid ways we can recreate this. What are the ways that we can create inflection points for people to have spontaneous conversations, or what are the ways that we can give people a break, that helps them show up, fully for that meeting at 3 p.m., rather than saying, how can we recreate the workforce of 2019? I think that the real advice this year and into the future is, how do we create the workforce that responds to the challenges of today? Mm-hmm. That's my soapbox here. But I use that as a transition to ask you guys about any trends that you might see in the workforce right now. I will say that, a year ago, you couldn't walk into Fast Company newsletter without hearing how the open office was dead. And over the last year, we've all learned phrases like Zoom fatigue, hybrid modeling, hub and spoke office management, all of these things. I want to say, let's start in the sort of near term. Presuming that a vaccine is effective by, say, the end of the summer, what are some of the trends that have been created in the last year that you think will stick around? Let's just say near term, the next year or so. Matt, do you see anything at Markel that has staying power in the short term?
Yeah, and this is something we've been looking at, and when I say we, it's really our human resources department, and in partnership with executive leaders, have been looking at what is the future of work at Markel. And so as part of that, they've done a vast array of research and real-time research in terms of what are other companies doing right now, and what are the emerging trends. And I think the biggest thing that we're seeing is you have some people or some companies that are out there making massive real estate decisions, like Nationwide Insurance, eliminated all but 16% of their offices or something like that. Well, that might have been in the works already, so I don't think we're seeing anything right now in terms of real estate or some of the big investment decisions that would really be, provide enough clarity for anybody else to say, oh, this is what the market's doing. But the biggest trend we're seeing is a commitment to flexibility going forward. And so I think the number of remote office opportunities on LinkedIn is skyrocketing. Companies are realizing that you can access talent markets anywhere in the world now, or you can retain your talent by letting them live wherever they want to live, and then finding out what is an in-person experience, because there are experiences that need to be powered and are best in person. To find out what those are, like ideation or certain collaboration or planning sessions, that sort of stuff, and to say, we will commit to doing those in person, but the rest of our work, if it makes sense, we can do remotely. And now we have access to a larger talent pool. So I think it's a big thing. It's just flexibility for now, and then TBD on the hard capital investments.
Sure. Matt, let me stick with you real quick on that. Because I think that, when you sort of look across industries, and, the trend, from the 1970s on was this offshoring of sort of America's manufacturing base. And, people would say that, this is lower skilled work. You didn't necessarily need to have a master's or bachelor's degree to come into this stuff, and that it could, you could prop up a factory in Vietnam or China, and really lower your bottom line. Now, but up until this year, the creative classes, the professional classes have sort of said, well, hey, we bring something to the table that you can't find anywhere else. And I'm curious, we have learned that, maybe if you've got a company in Richmond, Virginia, you can just as easily hire somebody who's in Charlotte or LA. What do you think? And you don't have to have the right answer. I'm really just sort of curious. And both of you, the potential for offshoring some of these creative and professional class jobs, or do you think it just makes it a global competitive marketplace? And if you're good, you're good. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I think this is interesting because, and it's so, taking off my Markel hat and putting on, the writer hat. With my first book, I did sort of think about the American experience and what happened to America when we sent so many jobs overseas. And it was interesting because, if you put on your international lens, there are 300 million people in China right now that were elevated into the middle class. There is no economic development program the United States has ever embarked on that's impacted positively that many people. And so it devastated American manufacturing, but at the same time, propped up basically an entire population of the United States in China. And so, all judgment aside, it was a powerful move. I think what's interesting with what you're getting at here is, do we see a total globalization essentially of all functions of work? And I don't know. And I wish I could know. And maybe I'll just, shorten my statement to say I don't know, because when you look at it, so Markel's already a global company. So for us, all talent markets are accessible and we leverage all. But we haven't necessarily migrated functions to lower cost markets or anything like that. I think we're still committed to finding the best talent wherever they are, and then just trying desperately to hold on to them, because that's what all companies are doing now. But yeah, and Lisa, by all means, if you have other thoughts, I just don't know that it'll be the sort of mass movement of jobs that you've seen in the past. Because I think, at the same time that we brought those 300 million in China, and there's other countries that have had similar experiences, that also elevated their salaries and wages and things like that. So there are fewer and fewer low-cost markets that you could go to for what we're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, I would say that this is where we might see a difference between some of the larger companies and smaller organizations, because as a smaller organization with less than 200 employees, we haven't had a lot of remote employees over the years. And so it's something we have had to open up, within our organization. And then that causes you in HR, you've got to then make sure your compensation policy allows for that. So I think there is a difference here where larger companies may have already had those things in place, and smaller organizations are in new territory, and we'll have to rely on companies like Dominion and other companies that can guide them, because there's also those compliance issues that you have to deal with too. So.
Yeah, I appreciate you both sort of going down that quagmire with me. It's just a thought that I think is interesting. And as we do live in an increasingly globalized world, how does that, how do those pressures come to bear on, whether you're a poultry processing plant in Des Moines, Iowa, or you're a Fortune 100 company that operates across international borders. And it's just an interesting thing to consider. And as I think about that, I think that there's some truths to work. And there's a sense that what we do, we spend 8 hours a day, oftentimes more these days, trying to derive meaning from our work and feel seen by our organization, and to feel like we're having an impact. I want to dive back into sort of this sort of look at what culture is. It remains a sort of squishy subject. And I want to know what your thoughts are in terms of sort of having an impact on culture. Are there certain levers that you can pull? I think sort of a holdover from sort of the industrial age is that if we can just break something down into its constituent parts, then we can pull this lever and hold off on hitting that button, and then we'll have moved the organization forward to a place that feels good. But then I think oftentimes our experiences say the sum of our parts is more than just each little piece. So Matt, as you look at a company culture, how nitty gritty do you get? How granular do you get when you're like, well, hey, let's talk about communication policy versus benefits and compensation. How do those things start to interact as you're building this amorphous whole?
Yeah, and so I think if you ask most leaders in human resources or similar functions today, whether they want to move human behavior or culture, most would say yes. Because when you're navigating change at this pace, you absolutely have to continue to move the culture along with it. What I think is a cautionary tale for most of those leaders is to put down the business books right now and to pick up the social science books, the anthropology books, the social psychology books, the storytelling books, so you can understand. If you look at human history, we did not build, the Hoover Dam. We did not, embark on the Manhattan Project or getting to the moon on the basis of a change management plan that was powered by a corporate framework. There was none of that. What it was foundational elements that have always driven human change, which is, what is a story that's going to give us the meaning and the purpose that's going to inspire us to put in a little extra work, and what are the social dynamics that are going to continue to shape group behavior. And so I think the two levers you can pull, one is find that why. If you don't have the why, you don't have a story to tell about your company, and then full stop, we're done. So find that why, and then find the story of your organization that people can believe in. And once you have that, then you have to get tactical and figure out how to tell it. The second lever is understanding social psychology. So, it's easy to roll your eyes at corporate emails and other different things. But if you do the sorts of things, and Lisa's organization is great, understanding where your people are, and then understanding who motivates people on a group sort of social level allows you to figure out, okay, this group or this division or this department right now is entirely disengaged, they're not buying in. well, who are they answering to? Who is the sort of authority that's driving that subculture? Once you find that, then you engage very targeted stakeholders where you can essentially move the needle by just, it's usually a handful, less than 50 people in a large organization that are shaping the culture in real time. If you can motivate them and tell them about what they need to do to help bring this on board, then you will actually shape the culture in a real way. And that's not, a knock on formal business books and all that stuff as a guy who writes a couple of them, but I think it's more important now to look at those sort of historical drivers of change.
Yeah, I would say you touched on two really important things, and some of the other culture drivers that we've uncovered. Meaningfulness. If people have that connection to the work that they're doing, that's when you're gonna find the sweet spot where they're intrinsically motivated, and that's really what you want. So over the last year, we have seen that whether the organization was struggling to survive and people were like, we're going to do this together, that can be motivating for people, but they have to understand the why behind it so that they know how what they're doing is connected to that greater purpose. And then Matt, you alluded to that manager-employee relationship. That is so important. And we've all read about that, but our research definitely backs up the fact that employees want a manager who helps them learn and grow, but also who cares about them and is concerned about them. And if a manager did not show concern in 2020, well, you can guess that those employees were not engaged, because that's a really important factor, especially given the circumstances that we're facing.
I'm very curious, and Matt, you sort of alluded to the knowing your why so that you can tell people. I think that's a really powerful place for leaders to spend some time and think about, how do I present this information? I want to ask both of you, what do you say to, whether it's a middle manager or a CEO who says, we make widgets. We come in every day and we produce these widgets. We produce them quickly and we ship them quickly. And I really just want people to be here on time, and I want them to leave at 5 o'clock. And that's a workplace we've established. There's a culture there. It doesn't sound like the most engaging place to be, but it may be. But it is a really cut and dry. Here's the expectation: show up on time, make the widgets, head home at 5. What's your advice to someone like that who says, "Man, this has been a challenging year. I never spent any time thinking about culture, and now all of a sudden I've got people that are disengaged, and I really just thought they wanted to make widgets." How does that middle manager or CEO find their story?
Yeah, and Lisa, by all means, go if you'd like. Otherwise, I can trudge on.
Yeah, I would say they've got to find ways to tell the story. So somebody out there is using the product that this widget is in, and it's got to have an impact somewhere. And so depending on what you do, you might have to search a little harder, but bring those customer stories inside your organization and share them. And I think Simon Sinek had done research on people that were raising funds for a nonprofit. And when they actually learned about the people that they were helping in their stories, their performance went through the roof. And so you've got to find those ways, whatever business you're in. Not all businesses are sexy and fun. So you've got to find a way within your business to connect it. But I'd say look for those customer success stories. That's one great way.
Yeah, it's a really good piece of advice there. Just connecting to a larger whole, I think, is always important. Matt, do you have any thoughts on that idea of finding your story?
And Kevin, you've unlocked Pandora's box, as you know, because anything that I look at is going to be at least 100 years old. So I think what I found an interesting case study when I was doing the last book, in the wake of the Gilded Age. So this was a true industrialization, particularly in the United States, totally reimagined the way we work. You had people, for example, in the furniture industry who were making chairs in their homes in Appalachian Mountains, and now all of a sudden they're working in a factory, and instead of building a chair, I now build the front left leg. And it totally just, in terms of efficiency, nailed it. In terms of the human experience, maybe not so much. And I think if we look at this, and your example's telling, because there are a lot of people in large organizations that don't see the value of this. They say, why can't we just do the work and focus on the work and not talk about all this soft culture stuff? Well, the reason is because if you look backwards at what happened to human beings when they were working in those industrial settings, they got very, very miserable. Miserable people are not as productive as content and fulfilled people. It's self-evident when you see it across the board. And so what I loved was I was looking at this, and there were a lot of people at the time looking at it, trying to figure out what is happening to each of these employees. Because what used to be a very happy Appalachian furniture maker who was proud of every single chair they made is now somebody who's bitter and angry and maybe even an alcoholic. And they were looking at this happening at scale. And so there was a minister named William Gannett. He was a Unitarian minister, and he saw this as a human tragedy, and he said, I want to really write something about this. And so at the time, he wouldn't necessarily write a whole book, he might write a pamphlet. And so he wrote a pamphlet called Blessed Be Drudgery. And the idea behind this was really interesting. He was trying to figure out, okay, well, what do we do with all these people? And he was trying to find some sort of great story to tell them. And so what he told them is like, look, yes, your jobs are very rote and routine, and you're in a situation now where you are essentially a machine. He's like, but there's good news, because what happens is when you repeat the same task over and over and over, it becomes instinct. And when it becomes instinct, you don't have to use your conscious mind to think about it. So now while you're doing your work, you can think about the greatest pieces of art or poetry or literature, and you can expand your mind to new horizons. Well, what's interesting is, was he right? Absolutely not. You know, it was wrong. It was drudgery, and that's that. But what's interesting is there were over 2 million copies of that pamphlet sold. It became one of the nation's biggest hits because people were so hungry for some sense of meaning and purpose behind the work they do. And this gave them a light at the end of the tunnel. And so it comes back to what Viktor Frankl famously said after he emerged as a psychologist from the concentration camps, where he said, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds meaning. And so I think when you address that mid-level manager who says, we just make widgets, and you say, cool, so there's no meaning, we just, you know, press the stamp button and we're good. Well, then what will happen to human beings when they don't have meaning is that suffering will continue to increase and increase and increase, and then productivity goes down. And so I think rather than draconian measures to try and mandate productivity, it's very easy to try and, through the measures that Lisa's talking about, provide a little context and meaning for the work we're doing.
I love it. And I would direct our audience to the seminal piece of American cinema, Joe versus the Volcano, if you want an example of, you know, drudgery and the industrial form, and how, you know, that impact, or the impact of a workplace can have on individuals. I always have that image in my head of these gray factories as I think about a workplace without meaning, you know. So I want to I want to turn to your individual experiences over the last year. So I think it's so, both of you have brought fantastic insights to this conversation, and you know, both from a high level place and something that I think folks can go back to their day to day, and really start thinking about, man, how am I going to help you know, my client service team? How am I going to help that team over there? And maybe it's just, hey, let's communicate a little bit more intentionally, or maybe it's let's ask some of these questions. But Lisa, as you look over this past year on a personal level, I think we can all say it's been challenging, but there've also been some rewarding experiences along the way. I think that the fact that we're all sitting here, you know, is a testament to the fact that we can overcome. And I'm curious, as you look back over the last year, you know, with the you know, internally at Energage, the companies that you all interact with, are there any standout moments where you say, man, in 5 years, when I'm telling my pandemic story, I'm going to sort of look back on this and say, this sort of summed it up for me, or this was a high point?
I mean, I would just say personally, I've really appreciated being able to spend more time with my family, because we're all, you know, quarantined together, all 5 of us plus a dog. So I think the dogs are going to have the hardest time when we all, you know, start going back to offices.
Completely agree.
But I think it's those, like, just we really have an enhanced appreciation for our health and our well-being. And, speaking from my own experience, like just recognizing the amount of privilege that I've had in my life. And so coming from that place of humility, and recognizing that, and then looking for ways that I can help advance others that have not had the same amount of privilege. And I think the last year has also really brought, that conversation to the forefront. And for me, that's been something that has really added a lot to my experience.
I know that you are involved with some workforce development initiatives and like the Philly Employer Council. When you think about folks that are either transitioning in their careers,
Mhm.
or I was talking to my son's high school assistant principal yesterday, and I hadn't really had it in my head that there are seniors in college today who have had this bizarre experience and now are
Mhm.
scratching their heads going, I think I find a job now. Like
Yeah.
I just think of the cartoon question mark hanging above their head perpetually.
Yeah.
When you think about that, is there light at the end of the tunnel?
Mhm.
And maybe, when you think about that workforce development
Yeah.
piece, what's your sort of shout out to folks that are out there saying this is a tough economy? Where's the hope right now?
Yeah, I think it is tough in some ways, but I find that people want to help more, and they have more access to be able to do that because they're not traveling, and they'll take the time to do it, and it's more easily accessible through Zoom. So people want to help you. They just need to know where you are in order to help you. So I would say, like, for an early career professional, do an informational interview. If you're in sociology, but you're thinking about getting into HR, call me, like, just talk to more people that are maybe doing the things that you want to do. And even if it's not for the purpose of an interview, just people are going to want to help you. So be open and see where that takes you.
Really good call to action and observation there. I do think that the helpers always outweigh the haters.
Mhm.
Matt, as you look back on this last year, lots of challenges, but good things abound as well. What's a high point for you, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. I think looking back, and I just have to echo what Lisa said about those less fortunate, because it really has been bifurcated between people and a lot of white collar jobs. Essentially, it's been tough. But certainly, if you have children, it's been tough to try and do homeschooling. But it's not been anything like some of the service economy employees and what they've gone through. And I think the biggest thing this year has given me is a sense of gratitude, true gratitude, for the opportunities that I have in being in that, sort of corporate class. I really do appreciate, and hope to share some of my benefit, with those folks who are less fortunate, because it's easy in these large organizations, and it kind of ties back to our earlier conversation, to trigger some of those same instinctual natures we have for human conflict. You can find yourself in so many different political feuds within particularly a large organization, where all of a sudden, oh, I can't believe, I remember when I was at the Pentagon, it was like war inside the Pentagon, where I was like, I can't believe comptroller's doing this and public affairs won't let us say this. And it was just constant. I spent all my energy activating those same instincts of conflict that early modern humans did when they were fighting actual threats to their life. And so I think the biggest thing that I've had is a sense of appreciation for the opportunities that come with some of these jobs in different corporations. And one of the things that I really reflected on, and we've been building content, training the organization throughout this virtually. And I found a quote in 1907 from a guy named William Watkinson, and he wrote a sermon at that point. This is another minister. I don't know why I keep citing ministers, but he wrote a sermon, and it was called The Invincible Strategy. And he had seen that so many people fell into the trap where at work they mired themselves in conflict and despair, and they created just a very bleak environment. And it's a very simple quote, but all he said is that, it's far better to light the candle than to curse the darkness. And I just kind of held that with me, and I will continue to hold it with me, because when all this recedes and those internal conflicts come face to face, you can just look around and say, this is nothing. I will light the candle on this one. So I'm grateful for that perspective.
Well, what a great way to sort of wrap up this conversation. A really good, I don't know, I will absolutely find myself repeating that to myself in times of struggle and challenge. So I want to give everybody an opportunity here at the end. Lisa, how can folks connect with Energage? And what's the best way for folks to reach out to your organization?
Yeah, sure. So they can find us at topworkplaces.com or at Energage. I'm also pretty accessible on LinkedIn myself, and I'd be happy to make any connections inside of my organization.
Really appreciate that. Matt?
Oh, there it is.
Come
Just
on.
Zoom in on that.
Yeah, that's right.
Perfect. No, absolutely. I would, from a Markel perspective, I will tell you, we have a number of positions open, and the company is actively looking for talent. And so please do take a look at what's available there. There's some really great opportunities. And then, yeah, personally, find me on LinkedIn. My name is not very common at all, so it should be easy to just find me in
one
there.
or two pop up.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having us, Kevin.
Absolutely. Well, folks, if it hasn't been clear, I'm certainly a fanboy of this topic. I enjoy learning everything that there is about the different ways that we as organizations can better serve our people and provide for better meaning in the work that we do. The panelists that we've had today have been absolutely spectacular. Lisa, thank you so much for bringing your insights today. It's been a personal pleasure, and really just I know that our audience has gained a ton. So thank you for being so giving of your time.
Happy to be here. Love this topic.
I know it's a well that doesn't seem to have a bottom, and I keep coming back to it. But it's I always walk away feeling a little bit more inspired, and I've got a little bit more energy to tend to the fire, to light that candle, I suppose. Matt, thank you, sir, for being here. It's always good to see you, and I appreciate you being so willing, so giving of your time.
Oh, likewise. Yeah, this was a blast.
Awesome. Well, to everybody out there in webinar land, my name is Kevin Wilson, and this has been another episode of The Beacon. You can find us at dominionpayroll.com. Hit that resource button at the top of the homepage, and you can find all of our future upcoming webinars and recordings of previous ones. We've got one coming up this week for any of our clients out there. Big new user interface coming out for the iSolved payroll platform that you use every day to track your hours, clock in and out, all the good stuff, man, everything from pay stubs to PTO. And we've got a great new look coming out. I'm pretty happy with it. And we've got our own Stephanie Young walking through all the ins and outs and the new features that you need to be abreast of as we roll this out. So that is February 26th. That is this Friday at 11 a.m. and you can register at dominionpayroll.com. That is it for me today. I appreciate you all being here, joining us. Thanks again to our fantastic guests, Lisa Sordilla with Energage and Matt Johnson from Markel. It's been a great conversation. I appreciate you being here once again. I am Kevin Wilson. This is The Beacon. And as always, don't forget to wash your hands. Everybody have a great day.
Thanks.